chaos on the South China Sea. Its waters are a vital trade route, a rich fishing ground, and home to major oil and gas reserves. But it's also a battleground between China and the Philippines. Both countries, along with a number of Southeast Asian nations, have competing claims over the waterway. And confrontations, often violent ones, are ramping up between Chinese and Filipino vessels, each side blaming the other for provoking tensions. At the same time, China is continuing to expand military bases on artificial islands in the disputed waters, while the Philippines is expanding military partnerships with its neighbours and Washington. So could the South China Sea be the next flashpoint for armed conflict? And will the US get dragged in? And why has the man in charge of the Philippines Armed Forces ordered his troops to prepare for a Chinese invasion of Taiwan? Hello, I'm Louise Watt in the Philippines, and this is Correspondents, where we talk about the news and what's going on behind the news with reporters around the region. For this special edition of the programme, we're in a studio belonging to NewsWatch Plus, a TV and digital channel based in Manila. With me are Tristan Nodalo, head of reporters at NewsWatch Plus. He focuses on foreign policy, among other issues. And Manny Mogato, formerly a Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist at Reuters, now defense editor at OneNews, a Philippines news channel. Thank you both for joining me on Correspondents. We've seen multiple confrontations at sea between the Philippines and China over the past year. Most have happened in waters around the Spratly Island chain, a collection of largely uninhabited islands and sandbanks which are in the Philippines' exclusive economic zone. But China claims the area is part of its territorial waters. Tristan, why have tensions increased here?
Since the start of the Marcos administration, they implemented what they call as transparency initiatives strategy. The Philippine government is more aggressive now in exposing the activities of China in those disputed areas. We've noticed that China became more aggressive in terms of enforcing its so-called rights in those waters, while the Philippines, together with the help of journalists, they started to tell the Filipino public about what is really happening on the ground. For the government, it's one way of telling the community of nations, this is what we are dealing with and we need your supports.
So are the incidents actually increasing, or is it just that we see footage of them now?
In Ayungin Shoal in particular, where the starting point of the resupply mission to our decades-old warship, BRP Sierra Madre, the situation somehow pacified because the government brokered a temporary deal with China during its last bilateral meeting. But it doesn't stop from other incidents happening in other parts of the West Philippine Sea, in Scarborough Shoal or Bajo de Masinloc. The Chinese has also been aggressive. They released a map saying that it's part of their territory, and now they're virtually blocking the entire shoal where Filipino fishermen used to fish. So while the situation in Ayungin Shoal, we would say it's temporarily calm and peaceful, but in other areas, there are still incidents happening.
Manny, you've covered defense for years. There have been growing fears that a conflict could break out in the Taiwan Strait. Do you think the South China Sea is an underreported flashpoint?
Not exactly, because it has been a flashpoint since the late 80s. There was a naval conflict between Vietnam and China in 1988, where China was able to seize Pirate Cross Reef. And then they started occupying 7 uninhabited islands in the area. The Chinese activities has been increasing ever since 1992, when the U.S. abandoned Subic Bay. The 2 large bases in the Philippines, Clark and Subic. When they left, that's when China began increasing their activities and their operations in the South China Sea. And in 1995, they occupied Mischief Reef. And that's when they started building up. And then by 2010, they started building artificial islands. So it has long been a flashpoint.
And you've both been to this part of the South China Sea, what the Philippines government calls the West Philippine Sea. What is it like down there when you go? Does everything feel very tense? Is everyone on high alert there, Tristan?
I visited the West Philippine Sea at least twice in the recent years. The first one was when we went to Pag-asa Island when they started to build a research laboratory for the Philippine Coast Guard.
And that's in the Spratly Islands.
Yes, in Pag-asa Island. At that time, we didn't have an aggressive encounter from Chinese Coast Guard, but we've seen the ships from afar, but they just went around and hovering the island. Of course, the feeling of uncertainty is there on what will you encounter.
And these reefs and these shoals where the altercations happen, what do they look like? Do you even see them, Manny?
Well, I've been to that area many times long ago when the Chinese were not yet harassing the Philippines. And we were on an indigenous boat, so the trip was very long. It takes about two days to reach there. And there's nothing you can see. It's all at sea because the shoals are submerged. The only thing that you can see are Pag-asa Island, what Tristan has been saying. It's a huge island where we have military installation, we have an airstrip, we have some villagers there. Before reaching that, it's all water.
So it's expanse of water. You can't see these submerged rocks, essentially. Tristan, why is this part of the South China Sea important to the Philippines?
Because it's also a demonstration of our how we assert our sovereignty as a nation and our sovereign rights in those areas. We fought for it in the 2016 Arbitral Award. We have the legal right to assert our right there.
That was the case that the Philippines took to an international arbitration panel
Against China in the UNCLOS tribunal. What the president has been repeatedly saying that we will not surrender an inch of our territory. The mere fact that you are asserting your right means that you are not allowing anyone to occupy those areas.
And in some of the confrontations, Chinese Coast Guard vessels have fired water cannon at Philippines vessels. That's as they were trying to stop resupply missions to the Sierra Madre, which is an old World War II ship deliberately grounded in the area and turned into a Philippines military base. There are questions over how much longer this rusting ship can last. Manny, what would happen if this military base falls apart?
I've been there when the Philippines started repairing the ship. So I would say that it could last some more years because they were able to reinforce the ship and they were able to bring in construction materials. So I would say that this will still last for maybe another 10 years.
And of course, this is a key part of the Philippines' claim to this part of the South.
Yeah, actually, it's not a claim because we have legal rights under the 1982 Convention of the Law of the Sea. That's part of our maritime zone. We have jurisdiction over economic rights under UNCLOS. So it's actually under Philippine jurisdiction. But beyond that, of course, is no longer Philippine jurisdiction, beyond the 200 nautical miles exclusive economic zone. So, Ayungin Shoal, or Second Thomas Shoal, where the Sierra Madre is located, is under the Philippine EEZ. So, it's not a claim because we have the right to be there.
You've obviously covered this for years. What is your sense? Could a conflict break out? What is the likelihood?
I'm not really worried that a conflict will break out in that area. China is more interested in retaking Taiwan before South China Sea because there's nothing there. What's the economic benefit for China in taking South China Sea? Obviously strategic for them because it's part of their first island chain. But if you look at the area, there's nothing there. They cannot occupy anything. except small shoals, small reefs that are very vulnerable to any attack by the U.S. or other countries. They have more strategic value for them is Taiwan.
Well, tensions have been rising there, and the United States could have a role to play because the US is a treaty ally of the Philippines, which means both countries are obligated to come to the aid of the other if they are under attack. Tristan, as a treaty ally, how worried are Filipinos by the US's changing policies towards its traditional allies, from tariffs to security?
Well, of course, there's apprehension at first when U.S. President Donald Trump took over, despite the assurances of our Philippine leaders in the U.S. that says that regardless of whoever wins, there's enough bipartisan support from Republicans and Democrats to the Philippines. But of course, we've seen how Trump changed his policy when it comes to Ukraine. So it begs the question on whether it would also change its policies to its treaty ally, like the Philippines. I guess some sort of assurance was given when State Secretary Rubio, Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth started communicating with their counterparts, wherein they relayed that nothing will change, at least in terms of the assurance of the U.S. in aiding the Philippines under the Mutual Defense Treaty. And then the recent visit of Mr. Hegseth in the Philippines also proved that the U.S. is more committed to supporting the Philippines. Plus, another highlight would be when the U.S. decided to exempt the $300 million security aid to the Philippines, together with Taiwan and Ukraine, when it imposed a 90-day freeze on their foreign aids. It somehow gave a good signal on the direction of the Philippine-U.S. relations. But then again, it's also important for the Philippines not to put its egg in one basket and then, just rely in the U.S. That's why it's expanding its cooperation with other countries like Australia, Japan, New Zealand, in terms of defense and security.
Well, you mentioned there the visit by US Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth. Manny, why do you think US Defense Secretary Hegseth made the Philippines his first stop on his Asia trip?
It's the oldest and most reliable ally in this region. We have a long shared history, shared interest, common interest. And now, because the U.S. consider China as a big threat to its military power in the region and also in the world, it is only natural for the U.S. to visit first the Philippines and then Japan, because these are the two biggest allies in the region.
He emphasized the US's continued commitment to its alliance with the Philippines, and he said this at the presidential palace.
Deterrence is necessary around the world, but specifically in this region, in your country, considering the threats from the Communist Chinese, and that friends need to stand shoulder to shoulder to deter conflict.
Tristan, friends need to stand shoulder to shoulder to deter conflict. Is there a feeling among government officials here in Manila that the Trump administration will increase support for them?
They're cautiously optimistic about the increase in support because, again, Trump is in early days of his presidency, so we still don't know on what kind of support we can get. When we spoke to Philippine ambassador to the U.S., Jose Manuel Romualdez, is somehow expressing confidence that the U.S. will be more supportive.
It was during Mike Pompeo's term as U.S. State Department Secretary that the U.S. categorically made its ironclad support to the Philippines by changing their policy. Before that, the U.S. policy on South China Sea is very vague. We don't know whether they will come to our aid.
And that support came as the first Trump administration was in conflict with China on a various number of issues.
Yes.
So that's also the context for that. I should say that the Chinese Foreign Ministry's response to Hegseth's comments there were any cooperation between the United States and the Philippines should not be directed against a third party or harm the interests of a third party, and it should not exaggerate the so-called threats, provoke confrontation, and aggravate tensions in the region.
I think the statement is obviously directed at the U.S. The Philippines and the U.S. has been already identifying China as a threat to the region and to the world because of its increasing military buildup.
And the Philippines has also been repeatedly refuting the claims that the issue of South China Sea is between geopolitical rivals or geopolitical powers like the US and China alone, because the Philippines has its own national interests.
Let's move on now to another kind of Chinese threat the Philippines says it's facing: infiltration. In the first 3 months of the year, the Philippines has detained 12 Chinese citizens on suspicion of spying. In one case, 6 Chinese and 1 Filipino are suspected of spying on US and Philippine Navy vessels. The Philippines Armed Forces chief said in April that the country was experiencing Chinese infiltration.
We are experiencing already cyber warfare, information warfare, cognitive warfare, political warfare. No? So sinisingitan na tayo. The communist China is already conducting united front works in our country. No? So dapat aware tayo. Tayo mga sundalo, aware tayo. No? Hindi po kathang isip 'yon na pinapasukan na nila. They're already infiltrating our institutions, our schools, our businesses, our churches, even our ranks in the military. No? So kailangan nating magmatsyag.
Well, in April, China said that it had destroyed a Philippines intelligence network and it arrested 3 Filipino spies. The Philippines National Security Council says these arrests can be seen as retaliation for a series of what they call legitimate arrests of Chinese agents and accomplices in the Philippines. Tristan, what is Manila's next step here? What can it do?
The priority is to give legal assistance to these 3 Filipinos who have been detained in China, because if they're found guilty of espionage, it could lead to execution or a harsh penalty. Some lawmakers doubt the authenticity of this accusation of espionage. They believe it's not in the Philippines' interest to spy on China and what's there to gain. They said that it's more China spying to the Philippines that's more reasonable.
This is an intelligent guess. Those 3 were arrested because China would like to swap them with the arrested spies in the Philippines. So it's an old Cold War tactic done by Russia and US and other allied countries.
Manny, how well equipped is the Philippines to deal with Chinese infiltration?
To tell you frankly, we're not ready. The infiltration started during the administration of the former president, Rodrigo Duterte.
So that was from 2016 onwards, 2016 to 2022.
When he allowed a lot of Chinese offshore gaming operations in the Philippines. And the military would suspect that some of those Chinese workers could be intelligence agents looking into the Philippines, because the Philippines is a very close ally of the U.S. And the U.S. has returned to the Philippines during the time of President Aquino, when they signed the EDCA.
I should just say that's the Enhanced Defense Cooperation Agreement. So when the Philippines agreed to allow the US to use some of its military bases, if the US poured money in to modernize them, essentially.
5 bases were offered to the Americans for access. And then it was increased to 9 during the time of President Marcos. They improved the runways. They built some piers. They built some water, fuel, and ammunition depot, barracks, warehouses. Before Joe Biden stepped down last year, he was able to promise $128 million to build more facilities in the Philippines, and probably to help prepare for any invasion in Taiwan, because most of the facilities were in the north.
So is there any indication whether the Trump administration would continue to support this?
Yes, because after the Mr. Hegseth's visit, the Philippines was assured that the $500 million that was promised by President Biden was intact. And there is a proposal in the U.S. Congress to provide additional $2.5 billion to the Philippines in terms of equipment under a law called PERA. the Philippine Enhancement Resiliency Act. I think this is still being deliberated, and hopefully this will be passed within the year or next year.
Let's turn now to defense. And the Philippines and the US are conducting joint military exercises in April and throughout the summer. Manny, how much of that training is to prepare for a potential conflict in the South China Sea?
The projected Balikatan exercises will focus on a war scenario. The Philippines will try to also fire their missiles. They have acquired some air defense missiles, some short-range tactical ship and air defense missile. They will rehearse full-blown war scenario. And this is the first time that they will do this, because in the past, what the U.S. and the Philippines have been doing are counter-terrorism activities. Exercises now will be focus on territorial defense, and we were able to build some kind of a modest capability to be able to train and test the interoperability with the Americans.
And the head of the Philippines Armed Forces, General Brawner, who we heard from earlier, he said that the country would be drawn into any conflict over Taiwan. Manny, what is the Philippines doing to prepare for a possible war between China and Taiwan?
Well, it's very hard to think that the Philippines will not be dragged into a conflict. But our interest actually is to rescue the Filipino migrant workers in Taiwan. There are about 150,000 workers in Taiwan, and so repatriating back in case of an emergency or in case of a conflict in Taiwan is the most important thing that the Philippines will do. Because what else can the Philippines do? They cannot fight China. So the Philippines can also provide support to the U.S. in terms of opening the EDCA bases. And then other civilian airports can also be used to host U.S. aircraft. Because we have seen that in the 2002 War on Terror. U.S. has been using a civilian airfield in Batanes.
That's in the north of
In the north.
Philippines, closest to Taiwan.
Yeah, and so we allow even non-military facilities for that purpose. So probably we can also do that in case of a conflict between the U.S., China over Taiwan.
That's why there are more proposals to conduct exercises in Batanes between the Philippine troops and with the U.S. And some lawmakers are also pushing for more practice in the event of a Taiwan invasion. They said that not only the military should prepare, but also let's say civilian ships or commercial ships on whether they can transport OFWs from the southernmost part of Taiwan to the Philippines. So those are the possibilities they are looking at.
And Tristan, you've reported from Taiwan recently. Taipei and Manila don't have official relations. But is there any communication going on between the Philippines and Taiwan as to how they could support each other?
We had an interaction with the Manila Economic Cultural Office, or MECO, who's
Which is
handling
the de facto embassy in Taiwan.
in Taipei, and they told us that they were briefed by Taiwan officials or Taiwan government on how to proceed in case of an invasion or in case of an increased military activity in the island. They also informed our OFWs there. And
The overseas workers.
Yeah, the overseas Filipino workers. I think they're also aware. We interviewed them, and they told us that they know where to go in case of an emergency situation.
And is your sense that the Philippines is actually offering more political support to Taiwan these days?
I think it's a delicate balancing act because, of course, Taiwan is also a partner in several programs of the government. We still maintain the One China policy. It's also a very important consideration, the diplomatic impact of whatever actions the Philippine government will do.
So before we go, it's time for our Reporters a Notebook segment. Manny, what are you following at the moment or keeping your eye on in the weeks to come?
We are focused on the elections.
The midterm elections in May?
Because the elections is very near. And then we are also focused on former President Duterte, who is now in The Hague. Also the possibility of an impeachment case against the Vice President, the daughter of the former president.
And Tristan, what's on your reporter's notebook?
The case of former President Rodrigo Duterte at the ICC, the defense team said that they might apply for a temporary release or they would seek to dismiss the case outright. I'm also working on the defense agreements that the Philippines is pursuing with other countries, because right now we've seen an increase in defense partnerships.
Well, we'll be following your reporting on that and all the other issues we've spoken about today. Tristan, Manny, thank you very much for joining us. And thank you for watching. I'm Louise Watt, and this has been Correspondents. If you're watching us on YouTube, do subscribe to the Correspondents playlist to get the latest episodes. Join us again next time.
Start your weekend with a cup of coffee and a moment to reflect on what happened this week.
Hello and welcome.
We've got you covered, from defense and politics to high tech and the arts.
Not just to Taiwan, the whole world is watching.
You make the coffee,
We make the news.
Here's what happened on TaiwanPlus.